Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Connected by Community, a podcast brought to you by Ballentine Capital Advisors. And today you have with you Ballentine Capital Advisors. We're going to talk about a subject matter near and dear to everyone with the election and interest rates and a lot of the things going on. We've been getting a lot of questions from our community, and we wanted to take a moment to share with you our thoughts and some of the information that's out there that maybe help our community with that. So I'm Bryan Ballentine, one of our hosts and co-founders of this, as well as a founder of Ballentine Capital Advisors. And I am joined by Anthony Colancecco, one of our co-hosts and Chief Operating Officer at Ballentine Capital Advisors. So Anthony, welcome. Been here many times.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we won't bore the audience with all of our intros. They can go listen to all the past episodes with our kids and know-hows. We're going to jump into this really important topic today about politics and the economy, right?
Yep, and I have a question for you to kind of start this off. I think a lot of people get the economy and the market thinking they're all one, so maybe you could explain the differences.
Yeah. So the economy is a set of things that happen, whether we hear these terms GDP, inflation, job reports. There's all kinds of things that go into the economy. You know, at the end of the day, it's probably how we each individual feel, right? So like we have our own economy. There's this real economy. There's a world economy, a U.S. economy, a state economy, a local community economy. There's a home economy. Like how does mom and dad feel when they're paying the grocery bills and everything economy? And that's very personal driven, right? And then we live in this politically charged world with social media, with the internet, with text, with everything. And in this election year of a general election year, super high charged, and certainly a lot's at stake. And oftentimes people come into our office, whether they're right or left. This whole debate, this discussion today is not going to be a right or left discussion. It's going to be neutral, so no worries. But we will be factual, right? And some things we're going to reveal and talk about, which are going to end up being neutral. Yep. And it's not that we're not willing to take sides. And we all might have our own personal beliefs. And I'll just maybe share before we jump into the data. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm going to give both sides of the equation. So please, no one jump at me. I'm going to throw both sides under the water. Again, I'm going to be fair and equal here. I never will forget, and we'll make two recent ones. When Obama was first elected, I had a bunch of clients who might have been more conservative come in and say the world's going to economically fall apart, we're going to fall off a cliff, and everything's going to end. And, you know, I'm not here debating whether what he did was good or bad. Again, not the point of this discussion. Didn't turn out necessarily to be true when you relate it to the stock market, right? So again, something completely, I won't say disassociated, but not directly interconnected in the way people think. And likewise, then I had when Trump was elected, the other side of the equation, clients maybe who are more liberally minded came in and said the world's going to fall apart, the sky's terrible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let's make decisions based on that. Again, against my advice, on both sides, sometimes people react and believe that one set of politicians has that great effect. And what I always say is capitalism is stronger than that. Capitalism has been historically stronger than a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, conservative. Now, do I believe that these liberal or conservative ideas can't chip away at capitalism? Absolutely. That's a different discussion. It chips away at it slowly and methodically, but it does not happen in the way that people might think. In other words, people think sometimes person ABC got elected, I should go buy a bunker out in the middle of the desert and start growing whatever you can grow out there and capture my own rainwater. And I'm not opposed to someone having safety measures. That's not, whatever someone needs to do to protect their family. It's just, I don't know that it reacts in the way, historically, that's the way I can speak, it does not react in the micro level that people react in their emotions and feelings about politics. There is a disconnect that is greater than people realize. And honestly, it has to do a lot with, I'm going to go back to my book, Wealth on Purpose. It's the lizard brain. Our lizard brain, chapter 1, tells us, we are instinct survivalists at our core, right? And so if I, in my feelings, to get all touchy here for a second, don't feel like the person that just got elected represents my connectivity to social and macro environmental, there's a lot of stuff that goes on there, right? Political, moral, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, I must react in a lizard brain and do something because the outcome might affect me economically. And the reality is in short term, it might really shortly, like I would anticipate whoever is elected, whether it's Biden or Trump, the market very likely could be up 1,200. It very likely could be up down 1,200 or more or less. Have no clue. If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be printing money. And in fact, never will forget when Trump was elected, it was up and down about, I don't remember, 700 or 800 points on the Dow all in the same day, right? So it is really a waste and a futile waste of time to try to predict that. Again, that doesn't mean we don't need to keep our eye on it long term. There are some long-term macro strategies that are going on as we tend to become more of a socialist society. Not advocating for or against that. All I'm saying, if we do, it can chip away at capitalism and long-term economic prosperity. That's just historically been a fact in history. Now, all of human history could change, but all of recorded history says it hasn't, right? That then could have an underlying long-term effect for your children and grandchildren. Maybe that's the reason to be concerned. But what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 years? Probably not as big a deal as people think. But we in our lizard brain get caught up and think we must make a change if X, Y, or Z happens. And the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll move on because we got a lot to talk about. I always find it interesting, these pop and stars or these movie stars talk about they're going to move out of the country when something happens. That's going to be their reaction, right? I don't think any of them ever have. Or if they have, I'm not aware of them. I don't keep up with them all. But it's interesting they don't. And one of the reasons is it's still the best country in the world. And I'll die on that hill, right? Like, go find me another one that offers you the freedom, flexibility. Currently, I'm not saying we're not changing, and that couldn't change. But if it's that bad, go find another.
And I think one of your famous book writers, Nick Murray, has stated this. Let's start using different terminology for the stock market, right?
Yep.
The greatest companies in the world, that's what we own.
Yeah, thank you, because I shouldn't use the stock market. Thank you much. Yeah, let's use this. Let's get that out of our vernacular. Let's quit using the term stock market, and let's use what it is. The great companies of the world and the capitalism they produce are simply not as affected in the short term by the political and geopolitical short-sightedness of either party, right or left, and the human lizard brain that gets succumbed to them, period. We could end this conversation right now, but we'll go on, right? So maybe as we go on, why don't you talk about some concreteness to this? We got just a couple slides. We don't usually bring slides up, but we're going to bring them up in this presentation to forecast and really the headlines do anything as we think about these forecasting headlines moving forward or in the past. And maybe you could share a little bit about that as we go through these couple slides there.
Yeah, on this slide, what we're looking at is forecast in, the last 5 years. And when we talk about forecast, it's really people getting on the news, predicting what they think's going to happen in the market. And these are very smart people from Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, that actually are trying to predict what they think's going to happen that year. And as we could see on this slide, it's very hard to do. It ranges from highs of 21%, lows of 26%, but on average, it's 18% in the last 5 years that they got it wrong, which is crazy to me because they got MBAs, right? They got the MBAs, a lot of letters behind their name, just like us.
And are these people living in poverty that are making these recommendations?
Oh, no, okay. Of course not, right? But what else is crazy to me is we make these predictions, we probably get fired, right? But they're out there on the news making these predictions, and they still keep their job. It's sort of like the weatherman, right? Trying to predict what they think is going to happen. Is it going to snow, but how many inches, right? But then when you look at headlines from like 2023, which is this next slide, we all know what happened in 2023 last year, right? The S&P 500 was up 26%. But if you look at the slide, it was a bumpy ride, right, in 2023. I mean, you could see everything that's happened in 2023 on this slide. We had 47 new highs in 2023. Goldman Sachs said that there was going to be a 35% chance of a recession.
Well, it's like, so Goldman Sachs, one of the wealthiest companies in the world, said a what percentage?
35% chance we were going to have a recession in 2023. We had 47 new highs in 2023, the complete opposite.
And even I'm looking at these headlines, there were a lot of times to be doubtful. I mean, certainly you look at March, went back up in July, but my goodness, late October, November pulled, most of the way back. And a lot of the big run up happened in the fourth quarter, right?
That's correct. I mean, we only had 2 lows in 2023. So a lot of people, and we had clients thinking this is going to be a terrible year, right? It's coming up to an election. We're going to have a terrible year. They're predicting a recession. We heard this in 2022, recession. So it was the complete opposite. So it's so hard to predict what's going to happen because you have to get it right twice, right? You got to know when to get out and get in. So it's super important when we educate clients to turn off the noise.
What do you think? What do you think drives clients to get succumb to these headlines?
I think it's really just sitting there watching, right? I mean, most of our clients are retired, right? And they just are watching the news, and everything on the news is to me, it's like the WWE, right? I mean, they're just there to entertain, to get likes and shares. They're trying to strike fear in people. So I think a lot of the questions come because they're hearing this on the news and they're watching it all day. Actually, I go to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you would think the gym would have sports or something else on, but they got CNBC on talking about the markets while I'm running on the treadmill. So it's just in our face everywhere we go, social media. So everywhere you go, they have this information, but I call it entertainment. I don't call it actual factual news.
Right. And what would you do with it anyway, right? Like, so, and as we have it in print, folks watching this, and of course those just listening in their car can't see it. But if I'm looking at the headlines and I'm looking at last year, you might as well be looking at the last 100 years, right? So do you make decisions every 5 minutes?
Right.
Every 50 minutes? Or every 5 years? Or every 10 years? In other words, I think people can get caught up in these micro decisions, which are really entertainment, and believe they know something that's actually not even a thought. It's a feeling or emotion that's gotten evoked because these people are experts in entertainment. Right. That is their job.
That's their job.
And
their job is to get people to watch, right?
That's all that matters. If it bleeds, it leads, right?
So they bring in very smart people with MBAs to try to predict what they think is going to happen.
Right. And often they're wrong.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So this next slide, what we have is about politics. So maybe why don't you jump in and talk about, we are in a political year. It's an election year. So maybe talk about how politics play with these great companies of the world.
Yeah, so great question. So I kind of alluded to that when we started. It doesn't necessarily have the effect. And the main thing, I want to talk about the slide. There's a lot going on. Encourage people to take a look at it. First of all, when it's red, it's when it was a Republican-leading political environment, and then a Democrat-leaning thought process when it was more blue, and then the totals in the middle. And no matter who's in control, what the thought process is going on, you can see they're different, right? There's different thoughts or feelings. But what I find most interesting is when you look at the two middle sections, it was more Democratic leaning from 09 to 17. During that time period, 09 to 17, the market was up 16.3. From 17 to 21, it was more Republican leaning. It was 16%. So basically the point is 16.3 versus 16, 0.3, about the same. Mm-hmm. It really didn't matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter long term. All I'm saying is people's fears about the politics turned out to almost be the identical same results, okay? And over the long term, the last 30 years, the market's averaged about 10%, roughly, right? And so you can see from that. And it simply did not matter. Our political leanings, our political beliefs, who was in power during those time periods did not matter as much as we might have thought. And while there's a lot of information on this graph, it really solidifies the way we started our conversation and where we are today. And it's not what I think people should focus on if they want a good outcome. If they want to be entertained, if they want to, let's talk about what they should do. If they want to be concerned about their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren's future, be concerned about the political direction of your country. I'm not advocating not to be a concerned citizen and not to vote. You should, right? All I'm talking about is your short and medium-term planning probably doesn't have the reaction you think, as you can see on this graph, and whichever party was in power had some level of success, and then from 21 till today, We see it back down at 9.2. So it's been all over the board for decades and decades and decades and decades, and just consistently has done well underneath both parties in the short term to the midterm. Again, the political reasons you might be concerned is the long term, but I think people are getting caught up within the short and midterm.
So we're getting a lot of questions because it is an election year.
Right.
And what do you, I know we can't predict, right? But what do you think is going to happen this year, especially with interest rate cuts?
Yeah, so that's a big question. That's
Yes.
a loaded question.
Yes.
I always say with that, this and $6 or $7 now can get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks, whatever it costs. I don't know is the real answer, and I'd be pretending to say I did. But, you know, many folks, I think it's reasonable to say when we're at 40-year interest rate highs, that a rate cut at some point is most likely to happen. Right. So is that the end of the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter? I don't know. If I knew that, again, I'd be printing money. It seems like a reasonable, logical consideration. That's as far as I can go. Stocks generally have reacted well to interest rate cuts historically. You know, small caps, if it's cut enough, have historically even done well. But again, all those things are historic. Can't predict if that'll turn out to be true again. So I would never encourage anyone to do anything with that information, other than to know it seems more likely than not that there's a rate cut, right? Now, what would prevent that? If inflation creeps up and comes back and the fire starts smoldering again, the feds may say we're going to push it off to 25. So you have to be real careful. This is not an absolute. But the preponderance of the evidence seems, if everything keeps going, might be reasonable. And this is anecdotal. Do not act on this. But I always say politicians like people to be fat, dumb, and happy, no matter who the incumbent party is. So they like people to feel good going into the election, right? So whatever powers may be, I don't mean to be cynical or anything, probably want you to feel fat, dumb, and happy going in. And one of the things that can do that is a lowered interest rate a lot of times makes people be able to purchase more, whether it's a car or a home or things like that. So, you know, not a conspiracy theorist, but something to ponder in the back of people's mind as they think about it. But we would be very cautious to the point of we don't know the future. If I did, again, I'd print money.
Well, at Ballentine, what do we tell people to focus on?
Yeah, so the thing we tell people to focus on is planning. Wrote a book about it, right? And so not to be
Read the book first.
Yeah, read the book. Not to be self-promoting, but Wealth on Purpose is supposed to fulfill some of those things and help people, you know, beyond just this podcast. Go out, grab it off Amazon, and walk through that. But financial planning is a process. It's not an end point, right? We need to focus on your long-term objectives and goals and not necessarily outperforming our neighbors, but outperforming your goals, right? We need to be disciplined in good and bad markets, a political year or non-political year. Know that politics don't play as much of a role in the short and midterm as we might think. Make sure that we're not overlooking global investments. You know, one of the things that we hear is, well, my U.S. holdings have outperformed my international. Sure they have over the last 10 years or so. The question I would have over the next 10 years, is that going to be the case? That's a whole nother subject, but don't overlook the opportunity.
The tale of 2 decades, right?
That's right. Depends on which decade. And you cannot invest in the rearview mirror over the last 5 years and assume the next 5 or 10 years are going to be exactly alike. They almost never are. And I think people do that at their own peril. And then tax costs matter. You know, we are heading to what's been termed the mother of all fiscal cliffs, right? So the Trump era tax cuts are set to expire. We have about a year and a half to deal with that. I think it will matter who gets elected and where that goes. I'm not saying that'll necessarily affect the market as much as one might think. In the short term, it could in the long term perhaps, but certainly if something doesn't happen, we are scheduled to take on one of the largest, if not the largest, tax increase in recorded history in the U.S. Know that has an effect somewhere in the economy, right? Economy and the market are not always correlated in the short term. And then rebalance your portfolio as necessary. And I think with the help of a trusted advisor, whether it's us or someone else, they can guide you in that process. Again, go out and grab that book. There's a lot of other good books. Wealth on Purpose is one of them, just to be a tool. But make sure you're getting the professional guidance and help, because this stuff's complicated. And as we go through this fiscal cliff, as we go through an election, there's a lot of short-term turmoil and obstacles that are going to get in the way of our lizard brain And if we don't have some guidance both on the behavioral management and the technical management, I think there's a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years to get things wrong. And this may be a mistake you can never recover from. You know, one mistake saved can pay for a lifetime of fees or costs for getting that advice, no matter where that advice has come from. So I encourage people to seek professional guidance in this very complicated stuff. Stay on top of it. Be informed. It doesn't have to be your thing, but it needs to be somebody's thing. And know there is a plan and a roadmap out there. And I think if you do those things, you're going to wake up on the other side of the election just fine.
And turn off the noise.
And turn off the noise. Yeah, man. You know, one of the things if you come to our office, you're not going to find a Wall Street Journal sitting out in the lobby, and you're also not going to find a Money Magazine. It's not that those aren't publications that haven't been out there a long time, but the last thing you need to do is be worried and stressed about the markets. That's what we do, right? The last thing you need to be worried about is the economy or politics. That's what we do. And hopefully you can find a home that someone can help guide you through and cut through that noise and help you focus on a plan and real outcomes in real life in a real world to lead to meaningful wealth. And meaningful wealth is not just economic, it's peace of mind. And I think if people will do that, they'll have a more prosperous life and have wealth on purpose. Therefore, the term came from that is having a purpose and having wealth, which is beyond money.
So if people want to learn more about the investment side, I know you got the book out and there's a lot of information. One, where can they find the book? And then what chapters would you focus on?
Yeah. So if you want to find more information about the book, you can find that on Amazon, and sometime, hopefully in the second or third quarter this year, we're going to actually roll it out on audio as well. We're working on that. It'll be available on Amazon as well. And I would tell you, read the whole book, but if you're just going to read 2 chapters, read chapter 1 and chapter 7. I think it really tail-ends the book together. You can knock that out in one sitting. It's an easy read. The whole book's an easy read, but certainly those 2 put it together. Chapter 5 about the investments, and in that we talk about the politics as well. So I think that's important to do. If you've got more questions, certainly find us at ballentinecapital.com, and we'd be happy to help you out there.
Well, one last question. I know folks might have heard this before, but what makes you tick?
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess it's a while since I've answered that question. So, you know, I always got to say first and foremost, my relationship with God and trying to do what, I've been taught through the good book. And then certainly do right by my family and my clients. I mean, at the end of the day, it's those kind of 3 cornerstones: God, family, and friends. So, and I would consider my clients friends. So those are my 3. What about you?
Very similar. Family for me is, really important. Coming from an Italian family, we spend all our time with our family. So that's one of the things that gets me going in the morning is seeing my 2 girls wake up and get going. But also being able to help clients through this process and seeing the rewards and the happy, sometimes crying, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of that, also makes me going.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this edition of Connected by Community. Certainly a lot to take in. This is a big political year. If you have any other questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us. Until we see you next time, go out and make our community great.